Let's just get this camera positioned a little better. Okay, now in the blurb today, I've asked a question. The question is, why is it that Scottish independence parties are so reluctant to give a date for some kind of plebiscite or plebiscite election on Scotland's place in the Union? Should we leave it? Should we stay? Now, many of us, and if you read the posts on on independence channels on a regular basis, you'll see many people saying, we are sovereign, we have the right to self-determination. And whilst that is technically correct, there is one legal impediment which is still standing in the way. And unfortunately, it's an impediment which all of our politicians recognise as the stumbling block. And that is so-called international recognition of, first of all, Scotland's right to self-determination, the right to vote on this issue and to decide it for ourselves. And secondly, on recognising the result of that vote. So if it were a yes vote, for example, would the international community recognise Scotland as a legitimate new state? And at the moment, that is not true. And it's not true for a simple reason. You may know from the history books that Scotland signed a treaty with England in 1707, the so-called Treaty of Union. But that Treaty of Union was very quickly disappeared, and a new version of it put in its place, which cemented Scotland into the so-called United Kingdom. And that was two countries basically with the same crown, according to that new version of the treaty. However, none of these treaties in any way, shape or form gave any rights to the English Parliament to utilise or to steal or to sell any of Scotland's natural resources, simply because at the time they didn't think Scotland had any natural resources other than sheep and wool and things like that. However, that's history. The problem at the moment dates from 1952, when a ruling was reached with the Scottish judiciary and the English judiciary, which stated that Scotland had entered into the Treaty of Union voluntarily. This is a lie. This was a lie, and it's still a lie. It was concocted in 1952 because the United Kingdom realised that the United Nations was planning to introduce a new process for decolonisation. And for that decolonisation status to be given to a country, they had to prove beyond any doubt that that country was in fact a colony of a larger state. In other words, had been taken over by somebody else and was being exploited, and they had no power over their own future, and that they hadn't voluntarily agreed to this. Now you might think, well, it's pretty simple for Scotland to say that we hadn't volunteered for this at all, because there was no public vote on whether to join the Union or not. Back in 1707, the decision was taken after a lot of bribery and corruption, persuasion and threats, military action being threatened, a naval blockade being put in place. So you could hardly say that we voluntarily went into it. We were forced into it. The trouble is that the United Nations and the Council of Europe and the European Union, all these major organisations of international groups of countries, still believe that the United Kingdom's declaration in 1952 that Scotland had voluntarily entered the Union is actually true. And having accepted that, that means that we don't have the right to self-determination. They effectively think that Scotland gave up that right to self-determination by volunteering to be subsumed into this Great Britain that was created in its wake. So the problem is that, first of all, somebody needs to establish the truth of the matter. And at the moment, the only somebody who is doing that, or can do that, is the organisation Salvo. And Salvo has been working for several years, and in one personal case, one member, over 4 years, researching the historical truth behind this fiction of a so-called voluntary union. And it has emerged through the historical documents that this is, in fact, just a great big fable that was created by the United Kingdom so that it didn't get itself into an international incident with these international bodies, because they didn't want, even back in 1952, they didn't want Scotland to leave the Union, because it diminished the entire United Kingdom and what was left of its empire at the time after World War II. but also weakened it economically and weakened its, shall we say, the respect other nations might have had for it, as well as the potential to exploit its natural resources when they eventually were discovered. So for all of these reasons, this lie has stayed in place since 1952. Salvo has now, and many people have asked me, how long is it going to take Salvo to make this case and to get a ruling on it from, say, for example, the International Court of Justice, The Hague? Well, the answer to that is very, very soon, because that case and those documents have now been compiled into, I would say, a watertight case, which actually shows that Scotland is, in fact, a colony in everything but name, because we didn't voluntarily enter into the Union. That can be proved with these documents. The lie that was told in 1952 can demonstrably be proved to be false, simply because the Scottish contingent who agreed to this so-called statement that we were in a voluntary union was in fact made up of people who worked for the union in the first place, because there was no Scottish Parliament back then, and so any Scottish officials who were in charge of running Scotland were already working for the UK. So basically it was the UK agreeing with itself that Scotland had volunteered to join the Union when it hadn't. So I think we can expect imminently to see this story beginning to emerge in the international media in other countries, because once a ruling is reached by an international body such as the International Court of Justice, which says that the Scots have proved beyond doubt through all the documentation they've produced that this story about us voluntarily joining the Union and giving up our rights to self-determination is a load of nonsense, and in fact we are colonised, and until the rest of the world recognises the fact that Scotland is a colony, we can't move forward on this, and we can't gain the recognition that we need. It will be, interestingly, impossible for the United Kingdom's media to squelch this out of existence, because this is going to emerge in other people's TV media abroad. And once that happens, then basically the genie is out of the bottle. They can't put the truth back inside and try to cover it up again. And this is why Salvo's work is so important. This is the enabling step that will allow Scotland, once this ruling has been established and given by an international legal arbiter, that we have the right to self-determination, then that means that any plebiscite, an election or any democratic event which we decide is going to be used to decide this issue will be legitimate. We will be allowed to do it, and the result will be respected by the international bodies who now see the truth of the situation. And this is why I believe none of the Scottish parties are prepared, at the moment at least, to throw their weight behind some kind of united alliance towards this goal. Because until this step is taken and the case is proved beyond doubt in international courts, we won't get that recognition, and therefore the United Kingdom would be at liberty to prevent us from becoming independent in whichever way they chose to do it. So all of our big talk about resisting the occupation, standing up for ourselves, exerting our sovereignty and so forth are a little bit premature. The sovereignty is there. We can prove it. We can also prove that the British state has no right to our resources. And as a part of that, as a part of proving that we're a colony, we will also be seeking legal reparations and compensation for the theft that has been going on for so many decades. Now that's a serious piece of international legal challenge, basically. The United Kingdom will be challenged in an international court to give reparations to Scotland for the damage to its economy, for the losses of economic wealth which Scotland was entitled to because its own resources were being plundered by another state, and we need that reparation to rebuild our country after independence. So all of these things are vitally important, but for some reason none of the political parties felt able or willing to devote the time necessary to do the research, to compile the documents, hire the legal counsel to present the case at an international court. However, that's now been done. Salvo has amazingly managed to achieve all of this without any public funding and without any resources coming from any other party. Although I would caveat that by saying that the ISP, the Independence for Scotland Party, is a supporter of Salvo. It recognises Salvo's importance, and although, as far as I know, it doesn't directly help to fund it at the moment in its own right as a party, it supports the aims of Salvo. And one of those aims, as well as convincing other nations around the world of our colonial status, is to educate the people here about their colonial status as well, and the fact that the sovereignty that we still retain, despite all of the media hype to the contrary in the United Kingdom, is still there and can and will be used once the legal right to self-determination has been established. So there are a lot of, you might say, boxes to be ticked legally here before we take the steps necessary to hold a vote on this. But please remember, even if you're not an independent supporter and you're watching this kind of content, that even if we prove this, and even if we have a referendum or perhaps a plebiscite election in 2026 at Holyrood, anybody who doesn't want to leave the Union is still able to vote. It's still a democratic event, and if you don't want it to happen, you can vote against it. So nobody is going to deny anybody else's rights in this. It will be fair, it will be legal, it will be democratic, but not only that, it will be overseen by international bodies, because they will be watching to make sure that Scotland performs this democratic event correctly and fairly, and that the count is fair and transparent. That there's no vote stuffing, there's no hiding of votes, there's no postal votes going missing. Nothing is being done against people who don't want independence. They will have a fair shake, and that is vital to make this stick. So we're in a situation now where we're waiting again, but as far as I understand it from my most recent contacts with people in Salvo, this new legal move is imminent. It's not going to happen in years' time. It will happen this year, and we will hear about it. And I'll be the first one to bring you news of it when that starts to happen. In the meantime, I've got to go, but thank you for watching the program this far. And as much as possible, please sign up for notifications to this. Press the notification bell, like and subscribe to the channel. It costs nothing, remember, to watch this show. And share it amongst your friends. Share it on every social media platform you can find, because nobody else is going to tell you this stuff. I seem to be the only person in a position to actually do it. I don't know why, but I seem to be the only person able to do it. Perhaps just because of my own connections to Salvo. But anyway, please keep the faith. But remember, there are people working on your behalf at the moment to make the case and to make sure that whatever democratic event we organise, perhaps in 2026, is scrupulously fair to everybody, whether they are yes or no voters. So it will be a fair vote, and nobody who doesn't want independence will be disadvantaged in any way. There'll be no cheating this time. This is going to be real, it is going to be legal, and it will be recognised by every other country in the world, as far as I know. That's it from Inde-Car today. Keep the faith, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.